Okay, we'll start in a minute or so. Just wait for people to filter in. Okay, well, I guess we'll get started. So, yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our 8th workshop in our ECR Skills for Geochemists series. So here we're aiming to provide some sort of training that's focused on geochemistry for PhD students and other early career researchers today for PhD students, and also to introduce you to some other members of the geochemistry community in the UK and indeed Europe. Now, the sessions that we hold are always free to join, but we ask you to register each time so that we can send you the joining link. And we have run several previous sessions on a series of different topics. Here's a selection of them. And if you go to our YouTube page, then you'll be able to visit them. If you have other suggestions for things we should cover in future, then please let either myself or Chen know, and we can plan future events that are of interest. So today we're going to think about things I wish I knew when I started my PhD. So we've got these great panelists who are all towards the end of their PhDs or indeed have passed on to the next stage of their careers. And hopefully they can give you some helpful hints and tips. But before we start on that, just to introduce the Geochemistry Group. So the Geochemistry Group, we're a special interest group of the Mineralogical Society of the UK and Ireland and of the GeoSoc of London. And our goal ultimately is to promote geochemistry as a discipline, but particularly to support early career scientists. Equally, our events are not always entirely exclusive to geochemists. They're often going to provide some useful input to people from other fields too, so anyone is welcome. If you'd like to find out about future events, then if you use this QR code, then you can sign up to our Geochemistry Group mailing list here. So I'll just leave that up for a moment or two for any of you who are not yet on our mailing list, but obviously should be. And so a little bit of housekeeping. The meeting is being recorded, and so ultimately it will be posted online on our YouTube site. Please abide by the Geochemistry Group's Code of Conduct, which basically says to be respectful of each other. Thank you so much to those of you who've sent in questions when you submitted the forms. We'll try to go through as many of those as possible in the session. One or two of them I may merge or may have paraphrased, but we'll hopefully get through cover as many of the topics that you're interested in. But also, as you go, if there's something you didn't have a chance then, but something's cropped up since then please put any further questions in the question and answer box. Okay, and so without further ado, let's move on to our panel discussion. And I'm going to introduce these four speakers to you. So this is Shenyi from Utrecht, Ariana from down the road from here in Imperial, Laura from Cardiff, and Ross from Royal Holloway. And so I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves rather than me trying to do that. So I'm going to stop sharing. And hopefully, there you go, hopefully you can see them all. So why don't we start? Where should we start? We'll start with let's start with Shenyi, because you're on the left of our.
Okay, cool. My name is Shenyi, and I'm currently working in Utrecht University in the Netherlands as a postdoc right now. And before that, I was working with David in UCL as isotope geochemistry. Geochemists basically, specifically lithium and magnesium isotopes to trace the circuit weatherings. Yeah, that's I did my PhD from 2019, and I left UCL I think 2023, the first half of the 2023. Yeah.
Perfect, great. How about Ariana, moving on alphabetically?
Hi, so I'm a final year PhD student at Imperial College, and my work is about lead isotopes in seawater. And maybe of interest or relevance is that it's not just a purely lab-based PhD. Halfway through my PhD, I realized I was not really a lab person that much. So I switched to computational work, and I am now applying machine learning to isotope geochemistry. So that's quite a big change, but shows that there are plenty of ways that you can do geochemistry from, I guess.
That's perfect. Great. Laura.
So I'm a fourth year PhD student at Cardiff University. So my research is using non-traditional stable isotopes, in particular titanium, to look at the formation of the Earth's early continental crust. So my PhD is mainly lab-based, but I have also had the opportunity to do some fieldwork in Australia as part of this as well.
That's great. And finally, last but not least, Ross.
Hi there. Hi, everyone. I'm Ross. I did my undergraduate at the University of Southampton, where I was a geologist, and then stayed there for my PhD, where I moved into more of a mathematical modeling sphere. It was paleoclimate modeling, particularly of the carbon cycle over the Cenozoic. And that was from, I think, 2015 to 2019. And then I went to do a one-year postdoc at Lamont in New York, which was interrupted by the pandemic. Moved to do a postdoc at St Andrews, but I was working remotely, so living in the south of England and working remotely at St Andrews, and then just recently have moved to a third postdoc at Royal Holloway in the University of London. All of them have been statistical and computational geochemistry rather than lab-based geochemistry.
Perfect. Thank you. So we'll talk about sort of, roughly speaking, sort of three groups of topics. And our first topic is on sort of research skills, lab skills, writing, all those sorts of things. So let's start with what is a skill you didn't have when you started that proved most valuable to develop during your PhD? Who wants to go first? Yeah, go for it, Russ.
Well, mine is easy and obvious because it was programming. I knew how to do no programming whatsoever when I started a mathematical modeling PhD. I hadn't been taught it. I wasn't allowed to be taught it because I was a geologist and we weren't offered computing or programming classes or mathematics classes. They were seen as unnecessary for us. And so learning how to do computing was really useful for me. I would say it's generally useful. I mean, the level of programming I do is obviously going to be different to everyone else, but I found it really useful for speeding up a lot of tasks. I mean, Excel and tasks like that are perfectly adequate for a lot of stuff. But there's a lot of times where there's something that seems simple in my mind and is not simple to do in Excel, but is simple to do with even basic Python or R or MATLAB or something like that. In particular, being able to like filter data sets. Often I'm like, well, I want to plot times where I have, say, both this isotope and this isotope in one color, but where I have only one or other, I want to plot slightly lighter shade or something to indicate what confidence I'm in. And you can do that perfectly validly in Excel, but it's a lot of manual clicking. And if you have a lot of data sets that look the same, it's a lot easier to automate that in a program. And so for me, it was definitively programming, and that's what I've done ever since. But yeah, before I did my PhD, I didn't have to do that at all. And then I started a purely programming PhD.
Perfect. Yeah, that's a great tip. Who else?
I guess for me, it's something important that I learned was all the lab techniques, and in particular, how to use these really complex bits of machinery like multi-collector mass spectrometers. This is to make measurements from a PhD. And this is something that was completely daunting when I first went in. It seemed like magic that somehow you could get a measurement out of them. But gradually throughout my PhD, I've become able to use them independently. And so it seems less terrifying now than it did when I started. And it does come with practice.
Mm-hmm. Perfect.
I guess mine is quite similar. So I came from a modeling background, and then I went into the lab to do initially purely lab-based PhD. And I had no idea how to process seawater samples for isotopes of any sort and use mass spectrometers. But the reason why I wanted to do this was to be able to understand how we generate the data that then modelers use for their own work. So while one could say it was unsuccessful in a way, because then I turned back to modeling, I think I eventually got the skills I needed to understand how the data is generated and get this broad overview of how you can complement observation and generation of new observation with more modeling mathematical approaches.
Yeah, from my side, I think probably very similar. Just like first, it's basically programming skills I developed during a PhD, and before that, pure geologists. I know nothing about programming, so I basically trained myself during the PhD, and it goes well. I'm basically the work I'm doing right now is basically programming as well. So It's improved quite a lot. And also lab skills. Same, I used quite a lot of machines during the PhD, so get a lot of training from that as well. Last, I think, is the skills to get information, I would say, because if you're still students from undergrad, you basically your source of information is very restricted. Restricted mostly from your supervisor or just like your classmates or other stuff. But during PhD, I'm forced to get a lot of information outside of the circle around me. So I'm approaching a different kind of people and getting information from different kind of sources and become more critical about that. So I think that these are three major skills I've got during the 3.5 year training. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, those are some great examples, right? And I guess it shows that you have time in a PhD to learn something you've never done before, and or to add in a component, be it a modeling component or a coding component, that makes your life easier and does a better job with the project. On the lab side, the question is, how can I make my lab work more efficient? So how can I work efficiently in a lab? We'll start with you, Shenyi.
Well, sorry, so I have to start a bit. Yeah, I think the first thing is you have to make a schedule and you have to make a plan for your lab work. You have to really know what you're gonna do. Otherwise, you just do quite a lot of experiments, ended up in nothing, and that's definitely not efficient. That take a lot of time, but it's not efficient. And also, lab work is like a repeated work, so you have to practice. So with time, you're gonna know. For example, if you are waiting for the columns, and meanwhile you can do something else, like clean your tubes, make some new acids, and etc. So you can do two things at the same time, but that's need time for you to make your own schedule, own way to maximize the time. So the thing I really want to say, I think the really things is first to make a schedule, make a plan, and make sure the plan is feasible. And the second thing is like practice more and refine your processes, refine your own schedule with time. Yeah.
These are cool tips. Yeah, definitely. Maybe Laura, since you did a lot of lab work.
Yeah. So yeah, like Shanyi said, like I always, when I was doing lab work, I often made sure I was cleaning my beakers while I'm down there waiting for my columns to run. So making sure you're doing multiple things at once. I also think as important it is to be efficient. Often things outside your control go wrong with lab work, like machines breaking. I don't know, there's been so many times when the mass spectrometers have been broken right when you need them. So I feel like it's always important to account for building some flexibility into when you're planning out your lab work. Make sure you have some sort of buffer time, because unfortunately, like things will likely hold you back and you can't be as efficient as you want to. So accounting for that, and I guess as long as you're not waiting to for samples to arrive or to collect samples, trying to start early on your lab work will help make sure you have plenty of time to get everything you want to do done in your PhD.
Yeah, right. Those plans need to be realistic. And maybe Ariana, for your bit of lab work.
No, I mean, I definitely second everything that's been said so far. I would add, make sure that you take very good notes of what you do in the lab. So it's of course important to be efficient, but also make sure that you know what you've done. And if you look back in 1-2 years' time, when you're writing up and you have a burning question on why you have a certain number in your results, you can always go back and trace the reason for that and eventually troubleshoot or answer that question, because otherwise you risk spending time doing something that then you cannot really justify, and then that's a bit of a problem at the end. So I would definitely say take really good notes of what you do.
Yeah, right. So efficiency doesn't mean doing things quickly. It means doing them so that you don't have to do them again, for example, because you messed them up or you didn't record what you did properly. Yeah. And Ross, I guess your answer to this is to let other people do the lab work and you play with the data.
Exactly. Yeah, I must admit I have never been in the lab beyond teaching.
Perfect. All right. What about then you've collected data, right? You've got to the stage you're kind of wanting to tell people about it. How do I improve my academic writing style? Who wants to talk about how you learn, if you like, to write for a PhD chapter or for a paper? Yeah, Ross, why did you start?
Well, I was taught to write in that I had tutorials during kind of undergraduate, or there were classes or seminars that I could take during my PhD and various training bits like that. Some of them were useful, some of them less so. I would suggest trying to find your own voice when you write. Everyone has a different way they like to write, and you can read a bunch of papers, and you'll eventually, if you read enough papers, you'll start to see, oh, these people like to phrase it like this. This group has a particular ethos towards phrasing things or how they structure papers. And there's no right or wrong answer normally of how, well, maybe there's some wrong answers of how you can structure a paper, but there's no perfect paper. There's just different ways of communicating, and some will work for you and some won't. And some papers you'll read and you won't find particularly clear, but someone else will find really clear. There's never going to be a perfect paper that you're ever going to write that everyone is going to universally adore. So thus, I think you should just focus on writing something that is coherent to yourself, and writing something that's structured in a way that you understand it, and then showing it to your co-authors, showing it to other people that can help make sure that what you've written actually makes sense to an outside audience. But my starting point is always, how would I like to see this written? How would I best understand it if someone were presenting it to me? Oh, I would like to see this in this order, A, B, C. And I think much less generally about what a traditional paper would be structured like. If I feel like my paper doesn't necessarily fit into introduction, methods, results, discussion, I can play around with that structure a little bit. In particular, it happens with models sometimes, because methods is a bit skew if when you're thinking about model, it's not exactly clear what's a method of the model and what's a result. You know, like if you've incorporated a new process into a model, is that a result or is that a method? Well, it kind of depends on the context as to whether the thing you're talking about is what happened as a result of the process you added to a model, or just the idea of putting it in the model in the first place. Adjusting the model can be a huge amount of work, could be a paper in its own right. So then there's not necessarily a clear definitive structure that fits into this introduction, methods, results, discussion, conclusion. You might have to play around with that structure a little bit within the remit you can within a paper, and say, okay, you know, can I make this clearer by bending the rules a little bit of what a traditional paper is and making it something that makes sense to me, regardless of that tradition? That would be my advice.
So write something that makes sense to you, show it to colleagues, and be flexible about your interpretation of what is wanted from a journal, I guess. Yeah.
Yes, don't feel like you need to follow, at least to begin with. I mean, there's going to be some publishing guidelines that you will have to follow, but when you first write it, you don't have to make it structured. If it helps you to structure it in that way, do it. But if it's inhibiting you from writing it the way you want to write it, then write it the way you want to write it first, and then work out how to fit that into the structure it needs to fit in a way that makes sense to everyone involved. And if it makes sense to you and your co-authors, whoever you show it to, then hopefully it will make sense to everyone else.
Who else would like to come in?
Yeah, I agree with Ross, and I think it's like don't put too much limit on writing. Oh, I'm not very good at writing as well, but at least I have some experience. Anyway, it's I think the first thing is like you can present some of the data to your colleagues, and you can memorize what kind of storyline are you following. So if you have this kind of storyline and you can just follow this storyline, it's easier for you to write. Otherwise, you only have the results and some sort of like intuition about the results. It's very difficult to write. So, but if you have a storyline, it's like how to make this results into a coherent and convincing story. That's much easier for you to write a story about it. And also write results discussion first and the introduction at in the end. That's helps well. That's at least works for me. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think for me, it's really important when I write to break down the story in little pieces. So I start with having first draft of the structure I want to write, but also like subsections and paragraphs. So if I get bored of writing a certain part of the results or the discussion, I can switch on to something else and write something that excites me more on that day or that particular time. I'm not sure it works for everyone, but for me, it's a nice way of keeping engaged with what I'm writing. But I guess my main suggestions would be, don't wait until you think your paper or chapter is perfect before you show it to other people. When you think it's good enough, at least send it to your supervisors, because you will probably improve more with their feedback than just by waiting and reading it yourself over and over and falling into this rabbit hole of having to make it perfect before someone else sees it. And at the same time, I guess, don't take feedback too personally. Of course, it's hard to receive feedback and see people maybe criticize constructively, hopefully, your work. But at the same time, it's not a reflection of who you are as a person. And when you receive feedback, it's generally because these people care about you and want you to improve your own work. So I would say first thing to improve your writing is really show it to other people once you're relatively happy with it. I was once told to be relatively happy, that it doesn't have to be the most happy you ever been in your life. It's still a piece of work in the end. It's not like a very, very important thing in your life. So make sure that you give it the weight that it deserves. Of course, it's important, but relatively important.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think we'll come back onto the topic of feedback perhaps a bit later as well. And Laura?
So I think I sort of echo what everyone else has said. Like, I find that sort of trying to develop my academic writing style, there's papers that I've enjoyed reading, there's papers I haven't enjoyed reading so much. I sort of taking from those what I'd like to try and include in my own writing, and then from that, hopefully, I feel like I'm still quite learning how to write academically, but that's sort of helped me develop my own style. And I also feel like, yeah, planning it is very key. Whenever I've planned out a bit of writing well in advance, the actual act of writing it comes so much easier if I know what story I'm trying to tell. So I often sort of like write like all like the key points I need to make in a discussion section on different post-it notes, and then try and rearrange them to make them into see which story sort of, or which order of them works best. So I found that's something that's really useful for me. And if I've planned it well, it writes itself a lot easier than if I'm just sort of going in blind with all these ideas in my head.
Perfect. Yeah, I think there's lots of really useful points there from you guys. Talking of planning, we'll switch into our second part of the session, which is basically thinking about planning and managing your time through a PhD. So we'll start with the question, how do you plan ahead effectively and set achievable long-term goals? So PhD is 4 years or so, 3.5, 4 years. How do you sort of plan for this timescale?
Well, I think this depends on, are you lab-based or programming-based, I think. Based on my experience, I was basically doing lab-based in the PhD. So the first couple of months, I think 9 months, is basically trying to get as deep as possible in your field, and also read some papers in the related field, just make sure you are very cutting edge about the knowledge in this field. So and meanwhile, you can do start to do some simple experiments. And after 9 months, you probably already know what you're gonna do, and you can start to do your to do experiments or do any kind of testing about your own hypothesis and the questions you want trying to answer. And that's really a matter of luck. Some people are very lucky, they can get everything done within 1 year. Some people are not lucky, they could probably get 3 years and still couldn't get any data down. But if we take the medium, it's probably take like 2 years for that. And after that, you can have a specific time to to interpret your data, to play with your data, and you also have some more room, spare room for to go back to the lab if anything is not right. So the first year, basically, in conclusion, is basically first year just like solidify your knowledge, your hypothesis. And this second and third year, just do experiments, and last a bit do interpretation, but also open to experiments. Yes.
Thank you. Ross, I think you were going to say something as well.
For me, during my PhD, what I had was like a hierarchy of goals, as in like hierarchy of timescales. And this wasn't something I chose specifically. It was something that kind of Southampton provided the framework for in terms of like how often meetings were and things like that. And so we had like a yearly goal. I had 3 years of funding for my PhD. So kind of what was I going to do in the first year, the second year, and the third year. And then I forget how often it was, maybe it was kind of once every 6 months, we had a meeting with kind of independent person who was outside my project. We called them panel meetings with a panel chair. And they would also kind of have some feedback every 6 months as how quickly they thought you need to be doing something, whether they thought you would finish by the end. So we had 6 monthly goals, yearly goals, and then personally I had, weekly or monthly goals. And now what I do, maybe as a result of that, is every month I write a list where I have a to-do list of things that I want to achieve. They're not necessarily things I'm going to achieve that month. It's just my like mental space to write down the things that I've got on the docket. And sometimes I might be like, I've sent a paper away to my colleagues and maybe it's going to be away for a month or two for them to look at it, but it will still be on the to-do list so that I can kind of once or twice a month look at it and be like, okay, have I achieved these things or have I not? What have I got on my to-do list? And I think that could work in a PhD as well, have a monthly checklist, not to say you'll definitely get all these things done in a month, but just to kind of a place to put all of your thoughts of what you do want to get done. And then if it looks like the to-do list is growing more than it's shrinking, then you can reevaluate which goals are important and which ones aren't. But at least you have that space to kind of self-reflect on what you do want to achieve during the next 6 months or a year and what's reasonable to achieve. So that's what I do to structure the time.
Yeah, thanks. Laura?
Yeah. So like Ross mentioned, like for Southampton, we have a similar thing at Cardiff where basically every 6 months we have to sort of fill in a form going, did I manage to do the things I said I would do in the last 6 months? What do I want to do for the next 6 months? And so I found that that's really useful for helping me to sort of set goals for what I'm doing in the next chunk of my research, and also assessing what did I manage to get everything I did done or not? Why might I have not got it done? Do I need to try and carry this forward? I also set myself sort of like a weekly goal, of which is like the main thing I want to get done this week in my work, which is I found very useful, especially as a PhD student. You're so sort of have to be so self-motivated. So I find setting myself this target for the week helps to keep me focused as I'm working on everything. And then now that I'm writing up, I've made myself a Gantt chart to try and sort of set myself these more long-term goals over the next few months to try and keep on track with making sure the thesis does get written. So yeah.
Perfect. And Ariana, anything to add on top of that, or?
No, not really. I think I
Fine,
do
perfect.
very similar things.
So there was another question which perhaps has been answered because you sort of alluded to this, Laura, there, but how do I maintain focus throughout the length of a PhD? So this is maybe not so much about planning and organization, but sort of how do you maintain focus and I guess motivation on the project? Does anyone have anything any other tips they'd add on that question?
I guess my answer would be a bit tangential to it, but the way I maintain focus and motivation on the PhD is by doing things that are not necessarily PhD related. So I don't dedicate my full week to and all working hours to just the PhD, but I like teaching, and I do a fair bit of outreach. And seeing people excited about the research I do or my colleagues in the department are doing is a great source of motivation for me. Makes me feel like I'm contributing and to society to some extent. And even when I might think it's not as exciting because I spend all my time working and thinking about this, seeing that other people are excited reminds me that it's indeed something that is worth pursuing. So I guess being distracted from the PhD helps refocusing when I'm working on it.
Thanks. Yeah, and those are some really neat examples of other things you can and should be doing within a PhD other than simply your own research. And also, if the lab work's going really badly, it's nice that something else isn't going badly. I think, Russ, did you wanted to add something on?
Mine's quite similar. I try and actively balance the bits I do and don't enjoy, even now within my job. Like, not all of it is perfect. I tend to prefer the programming parts and the teaching and sometimes writing, but other times I'm not in the mood to write, or I'm not in the mood to do a particular thing. And so each week I try and balance the bits that I really enjoy and then the bits that are kind of admin-y or need to be done, but I don't enjoy personally. And that lets me do the things I need to do, but also do the things I enjoy and not kind of lose the enjoyment that I get from whichever work I'm doing.
Yeah, good. All right, let's let's move slightly away from that. So this question, how can I give and receive constructive feedback in a supervisory relationship? So basically, how do you get feedback from your supervisors, but also perhaps how do you give them feedback?
I think the easiest way is in Dutch way, just be direct. Just say what you need. And in most cases, supervisors are very good, are very good people, and they take care of you. So they're gonna respond to your response quite quick, and yeah. Also, how to take it from supervisors, I think it's also just direct and just say everything clearly in emails, and don't be afraid or don't take any kind of suggestions personally. Just things, it is what it is, and yeah, and be optimistic, and I think that's it. Just don't have that much of hustles or going around, and that's gonna have a lot of misunderstanding between, and I think so. And also I think regular meetings helps for that as well.
I think like you the start of the PhD, sort of as you're sort of figuring everything out, trying to figure out what sort of meeting style works best between you and your supervisor is also really useful. So I know some people like to sort of like have a sort of agenda for the meeting that what they're going to discuss with. Whereas I found my supervisor, I'll mention maybe in an email when I'm asking for a meeting, these are the main things I want to talk about. It's a bit more casual. I guess it just depends what works for you, and it might be different for different people how often these meetings happen. But also just remembering like your supervisors are probably doing a lot of other things as well as like supervising you in your PhD, whereas your PhD is all that you spend your time on. So sort of making sure you give your supervisors enough notice or enough time to be able to look at a piece of work, some data or something like that, so that they can give useful feedback on it is important.
Good points. Yeah. Ross?
I've had a range of supervisors. I've done PhD and now several postdocs, and I've gotten on really well with most of my supervisors and not so well with others. So I've had a range of relationships with those supervisors. And I would say it's really difficult because some of them, it depends on their personality. Some of them are really receptive to wanting to learn how to be the best supervisor they can be. And other people, they have so much on their plate, they just can't really juggle all the things, and they're not in the headspace to be receiving that criticism or that feedback from you. My suggestion would be that if you want to give any feedback in that kind of sense, would be to schedule an actual meeting if you don't have one, regularly, when you can give that and kind of phrase it in terms of the things that you need or what you want from the situation, as long as that's reasonable. Say, oh, I'm having an issue because I find that we can't schedule meetings often enough. Can we find time in the schedule so that I can meet more frequently because I would like to achieve this, because I want to do that? And that helps, I think, when I receive that kind of criticism, me to be able to say, okay, how can I balance what they need with what I can provide and find some common ground, as opposed to just saying, you don't meet me often enough, you don't find the time for me, and then it immediately becomes really combative. So my suggestion would be to try and, find what you actually want to resolve from any situation where you have a criticism. Don't just give criticism for the sake of it. Try and find what the compromise actually is that you want so that you can together produce some kind of constructive output from the conversation that you want to have. And yes, schedule a meeting so that you have time to really discuss it and be polite and kind about it, and not just kind of catch people off the hoop when they're doing other things and they have other stuff on their mind and they're super busy and, you know, stressed. That's not a good time to receive feedback or to give it if you or them are stressed. So having like a space where you can say, okay, can we dedicate an hour to discussing how we can resolve this? I find much easier than just kind of bumping into someone in the corridor and being like, oh, I need something, you need to do it now. Very difficult, whether you're the person who needs to give the thing or the person who's asking for it. Very difficult either way. So yes, having space to discuss things and having kind of an outcome that you want to achieve that would be beneficial for both of you, I find always to be helpful.
Yeah, that's a good point too. All right. The last one on this topic, I think. What advice do you have for time management and, more to the point, perhaps maintaining boundaries for a good work-life balance? So the PhD can be sort of slightly all-encompassing at times and can be quite challenging at times and can be really interesting and like takes your attention at times. So how do you balance this with maintaining a work-life balance? Ross, we'll go with you.
I'll freely admit that I did not do a good job of this during my PhD. I really swung the pendulum from one end to the other. When I first started my PhD, I joined a lot of committees and I was dedicating a lot of time to doing kind of Friday drinks or running PG coffee or things like that that were kind of part of the PhD, but more on the social side and not leaving myself enough time to actually do the work of my PhD. And then I swung to the opposite side and then back again, trying to find that balance. Nowadays, for me, I try to treat it more like a job. That doesn't mean I necessarily do 9 to 5, but I dedicate kind of that level of hours to it. And I treat it as a job that I'm being paid to do for a certain amount of time and try and consciously make that boundary of, yes, I have hours that I give to my work, but I have to give hours to other things. Otherwise, I can't sustain that level of work, and nor do I want to. So trying to consciously treat it as a job that you do in exchange for money, one that you might enjoy, one that you might love, but a job that you do as part of your life and not the whole of your life. I don't know, making that conscious feeling made a difference to me, because it kind of felt like I was still a student in a way when I was doing a PhD, and to some extent it still feels like I'm a student now doing a postdoc, because I'm still at university and I'm still in that kind of mode of having lots of flexible working and possibilities. But it is a job, right? I'm doing it as a career. And so kind of making that mental switch from being an undergraduate student to, and maybe for me it was difficult because I stayed in the same department, but kind of making that mental switch of being like, okay, I'm not a student anymore, I'm a staff member, this is officially my career, this is a job that I'm doing, and so I'm going to treat it like I would anyone else who's doing a job. It helped me categorize it that way in my mind.
Right, and you could have made that switch from sort of undergrad to PhD, whereas you've made it more from your sort of PhD to postdoc times.
Yes, it happened more gradually. Like I said, maybe because I stayed at Southampton, maybe just because it took me a while to find the balance. So I would also say don't worry about it. Like if immediately, sometimes some weeks you feel like you've done too much work. Sometimes it will take time to work out what the balance is for you, and the balance will shift through time as you have different priorities, starting a family, whatever it is. Like it's going to shift through time. So I don't feel like you're ever going to feel like you've got the perfect work-life balance. I just feel like you're going to do the best. Feel like you're doing the best that you can, and some weeks you'll feel like you've done a good job, and other weeks you might feel like you've dedicated more or less to one or other.
Who else would like to come in on this one? Yeah, Laura?
Yeah, so like Ross has mentioned, all through my PhD, I've basically done 9 to 5 or equivalent hours just for 5 days a week, and made sure I try and keep the weekends work free. And I find that helps keep me sort of motivated to complete the work I need to do within that time. So I find that I tend to be efficient within that time frame. Not always, of course, but it sort of motivates me to stay focused within the week. And I find that having some time away from the work each week to recharge makes me sort of have more energy for starting the next working week.
Ariana, I think you had your...
Yeah, I was gonna say, for me, I think initially it was a bit hard to fit in the lab schedule in my actual life schedule. So some days processing seawater took very, very long, and it was not unusual to start very early in the morning and finish very late at night. And I learned quite quickly that if I stayed very late at night, I should probably give myself space in the next day to take things slower, or 2 days later, whenever it worked. But just make sure that I'm not working 6, 7 working days a week. That doesn't necessarily mean 7 days in the lab, but if you work really long days for an extended period, then eventually you work way too many hours. And I think that's very counterproductive, both in terms of lab work. You can't do good lab work if you are tired. What I was doing was a one-shot sample that needed to be processed in 2-3 weeks. So any mistake would have costed a lot. So, and then the other thing is that while the PhD might seem pressing all the time, it's actually a really long process. 3-4 years are a long time. So the reason why it's 3-4 years, it's because you will need that time, but you will have plenty of time to complete what you need. So don't rush it, I would say. And for me, it's been very helpful to find things I like to do outside of the PhD. So be it running, climbing, meeting friends, whatever gave me enough motivation to finish working day and go on do something else really helped a lot. So I would encourage you to find something you like outside of the PhD and stick to that as much as possible.
Great points. And maybe Shenyi, if you had anything you wanted to add?
I think back to PhD are really bad at work-life balance. Basically, there's no work-life balance. That's partly because of COVID hit, and so we have to wrap up all the experiments in restricted time. But the things like the weird thing about academic work is your brain never stops thinking. So even if you are doing something else, like you are relaxing yourself, you're lying on the beach, your brain is actually still thinking about your experimental data. So that's actually a lot of pressure. So basically, there's no clear bond between work and life. And I mean, people sometimes have to admit that some very innovative ideas coming from later time, like when I having a shower, when I lying on the beach, when I drinking beer, I suddenly have an idea about something. So I would say just accept this and just accept this. You never have to get away with it, and it's a drawback of academic work. But on the other hand, as Ariana said, we definitely need something to do other than just academic work. We at least have to set up a threshold, just like, for example, at least one day in a week we just don't do anything. We just don't open the computer and we do something we like. That helps you think things logically and sustainably. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. So also, again, here, there isn't one perfect answer for the thing that works for everyone. Great. So the final topic is sort of thinking about sort of preparing for the next steps and networking and other sort of aspects. So let's say you're at a conference or something like that. It could be the context for this question, which says, how do you talk about research with others when you feel like you don't know enough yet about your field or your sort of future research? Who wants to start on that one?
I'm happy to go.
Okay, go for it.
I guess the first thing I would say, and it's something I've been told myself several times, is that you are the most expert person on what you're doing. So if you want to approach someone with an idea or telling them what you've been doing, don't be too worried about doing so, because you're definitely very capable of saying what you've been doing. So it might be a bit of imposter syndrome kicking in, and I think everyone in academia, especially early career, might feel like they are imposters in what they're doing. But generally, people are very well receptive when you show interest in their work or want to collaborate. And most of the time they're welcoming, they have suggestions. I cold reached out to people after conference presentations that I thought were super interesting, and had really good chats with them, even if they were not in my university, country, exact same field of research. So if you're kind, respectful, and show some enthusiasm, I wouldn't be worried to approach people, even if you don't feel like you've fully covered the all knowledge there you need to have in your exact field of research. There's something that might bridge what you do with them, or that's there to be discovered, and that's what science is. So go for it, I would say.
Great points. Yeah. Does anyone else want to add to that? Or
Well, I think I agree with Ariana. Just be confident. Just say what you know, and it also depends on what kind of aim you want. If you want networking, I mean, in the early career, it's very hard to build your network because no one knows you, and so you really need to you really need some something to show your name, and then people begin to network with you. That's brutal, but that's true. But if you just want to have discussion with people, know just know more people, have a nice time with people, and I think that's just to be confident and to say what you know, and exchange ideas, and things going well. I mean, there are some jerks, but if they are jerks, just leave. It's just like they are not worth it. And in most of the cases, people are very, very good, and you're probably gonna get some new ideas, new thoughts about your own project after the discussion. So definitely, yeah.
anyone else want to chip in, or should we move on? Yeah, Ross.
My very quick tip would be to ask people to explain something to you as if you're an undergraduate or as if you are outside the field. Because I very frequently speak to people, and there's a lot of jargon in the geosciences, and it's very domain specific. And sometimes it's hard to keep up if you're not. For example, lots of people talk about novel stable isotopes, and I'm often like, oh, I don't work with those. So it takes me just an extra second to remember which ones are novel and which ones are traditional, because I'm just not in that field all the time, hearing that all the time. And so if someone's speaking with a lot of these words very quickly, it just doesn't really permeate what I'm saying. Also, I sometimes ask people, I very often ask people, including my own supervisor all the time, can you explain this to me in a way that an undergraduate would understand? Because then they get rid of all the jargon, and often the things they're saying are actually straightforward. They're just using a lot of jargon because it makes the communication quicker between people who are experts and are used to using these phrases all the time. You can say a lot more densely, but people are almost always very happy to explain these things at a more basic level if you're interested. And if they're not happy to, then that's probably not someone you would be interested in working with. So I would say 95% of the time, 99% of the time, if I ask someone to describe something to me in a simpler way, they're like, oh, yes, I can do that. And they view it as an enjoyable experience, as a way of kind of teaching you something that you didn't know before, rather than just kind of communication between experts, which is also wonderful. But then normally they're kind of in the network already. And for early career researchers, you may not be, you're maybe not as much of an expert, but you want to learn. Great, they're very happy to teach normally, and that's a lot of what lecturers do anyway, is teaching. So fingers crossed, a lot of them are already good at describing things in a way that is more straightforward than the kind of high level terminology that gets thrown around a lot within geosciences.
Yep. That's a nice tip. Laura, are you happy? Nothing more to add?
Yeah, I don't really have anything more to add.
Okay. So we're approaching the end. We'll fit in one more on this topic, and then a final question. So is your thesis topic or statement important in postdoctoral research applications? So I think the question here is saying, your PhD is on a certain topic. Is that how crucial is that for what jobs you could then apply for afterwards? And I guess maybe equally, could you apply for a job in something that's different from your thesis topic? Maybe we'll start with Shenyi for this.
Okay, yeah. From my experience, it doesn't matter the topic, because I think the PhD is just a degree, PhD degree, just to let people know you have the ability to find the problems in a certain topic, not specifically one topic, but you are able to find some flaws in a hypothesis, whatever stuff, and then you are able to manage your time and manage your resources to overcome the problems and to get some new ideas, new thoughts, new pathways to do it. So it's just like a way to prove that you have the ability instead of you have knowledges in a field. So yeah, so to me I think this doesn't matter. And but from my experiences, a lot of people switch their topics in postdoc, so it doesn't matter, but you have to make sure you have basic skills like analyzing skills and programming or just stuff or lab skills. The skills is are more important than the specific knowledge from a specific field, I would say. Yeah.
And I guess Ross, as someone that's also moved on from a PhD, do you concur?
I would say you would be lucky if it was important, because that would suggest A, you were still interested in the same topic area, and B, there was a postdoc available at the time where you needed one that was also in the exact same specific project area. Certainly for me, I've done similar things, but I started with mathematical modeling and then I went on to data analysis. It was still paleoclimate stuff, still kind of paleo CO2, but it was different for me. It was a lot of different methods. It wasn't mechanistic modeling, it was data analysis type stuff. And then I did boron isotope pH, so it was still paleo, but it wasn't really carbon stuff anymore. And now I'm doing cadmium isotopes for organic carbon. I knew nothing about cadmium isotopes before I started this job, didn't even really know they existed. So I've yes, it's all paleoclimate related and all to do with paleo-environmental reconstruction, but the actual mechanics of what I'm doing day to day, like the maths that I'm using and the models that I'm using, different every single job. So no, it's made no difference to me what my PhD topic was really. So only if there happens to be a thing that aligns, the stars align precisely, maybe that would give you a tiny advantage. If there happened to be a postdoc was on exactly the same topic at a time you were interested in it, it's very unusual in my experience.
Yeah, so I think the clear answer here is that it doesn't matter, as long, and potentially something that overlaps a little bit is good, because you have some expertise to add into a project, but clearly there's a lot more flexibility than needing to carry on doing the same thing that you did in your PhD for the next 30 years.
And also, if you move outside of academia, right, then no, I would also say no. Then I know lots of people have moved outside of academia, PhD, again, unless it happens to be that you're doing a geophysics PhD and then you're doing a geophysics job on the exact same kind of data, then no, I think that just demonstrates that you're capable of doing a PhD, and the topic area is a bonus if it happens to be relevant.
Yeah. Okay. So finally, final question we had says, on reflection, what crucial advice would your fourth year PhD self give to your first year self? Maybe we'll start with Laura, being a fourth year PhD, I guess.
Gosh. Yeah. So I think it's one that people say a lot, but write things as you go. Don't leave it all to when you feel like everything's all nicely wrapped up. Now you just need to write it up. Start writing if you've got all the data form, but start trying to write some discussion or interpretation of it. Then that makes the big sort of thesis project at the end a lot less of a mountain to have to try and climb. And I wish I'd started doing this earlier.
Yes, exactly. No, that's a great point. No, well done. Ariana?
I would say trust the process and trust the people around you who have supervised other people that got to the end of a PhD eventually. I think sometimes it feels lonely and it feels like your problem are just inherent to your own project, but in reality, most of the people that share the office with you or that were supervised by your same supervisors felt that way at some point. So trust the process. And yeah, I second right along the way. I did that, and I'm very happy that at the end I only had to write one final chapter and not the entire thesis. But yeah, I would say, and take your time and enjoy it, because at the end it's an enjoy. While it might seem like a very hard mountain to climb. I guess for me, when I got to the end, near the end, looking back, it feels like it's been a really nice ride. So enjoy it while you do it.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's another great tip. Shanyi?
Oh, I say similar things. Just distribute the work. Yeah. Yeah, and that helps you relieve quite a lot. And also, I would say just to be mentally strong and well, that sounds very vague, but you are the only person gonna help yourself. Yeah, and, yeah, that's it. I think so.
Thank you. Ross?
I would say, and this is maybe a strange one, is investigate the kind of academic structure generally more, or pathway more, because when I joined as an undergraduate, I didn't know what a PhD was. I don't come from an academic family. I don't think I'd ever even heard of one. And I only found out about that when I was in the later half of my undergraduate. And similarly, when I was a first year PhD, I didn't know what a postdoc was. Never heard of that. So I didn't know what that was. I didn't know what a DTP was. I didn't know what half of the stuff that gets mentioned was. And I just kind of thought, well, I'll find out when I need to know. But actually, as I've continued, I happen to have continued in academia, that stuff's become more and more important. And the more I'm like, oh, if I'd known this before, I would have thought more about what exactly I wanted to do. The same kind of thing for me applies with like applying to fellowships and stuff like that. I didn't know what a fellowship was, not until I'd done my first postdoc position, just never heard of them. So I didn't apply for them, and some of them I'm now not eligible for anymore because I'm several years past my PhD. Just didn't know they existed, right? And so things like that, and being like, okay, well, I could have found that information out at the time if I'd actively sought it. But as with anything, like you're focused on your work and doing the PhD and what feels like the core pieces of it, but there's a lot of extra pieces along the side, which may be social, which may be kind of the structure that holds PhDs generally together, that are really useful to know if you intend to continue in academia, or even if you don't, just understanding what the options are that are available to you so that you can make a good decision when you come to the end of your PhD, what you want to do next.
Great, yeah. So another different perspective, and it's a good point to flag that we have we've held sessions on postdocing and on fellowships. So if you're interested in those things, you're maybe second or third year into your PhDs, then go to our YouTube channel and you can learn a little bit more about those too. All right, we're hitting 1 o'clock, so I think it's time for everyone to go and either get back to work or go off to lunch. It's really nice to see the four of you, and thanks, Chan, also for your help with organising this. So we'll have subsequent sessions on other topics each term, basically. But for now, yeah, thanks for sharing all your insights. Congrats to the two of you that finished your PhDs, and good luck to the two of you that are coming towards the end of finishing writing. And hopefully see some of you at future Geochemistry Group, GGRIP conferences or other geochemistry conferences. So yeah, thanks so much and have a nice afternoon, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Bye.